So we're going to get started soon. My name is Alice Poe. I'm the Library Services Manager here at the Beverly Hills Public Library. We're very excited to have Jim Jimirro on Zoom. And we're also very excited because this week is the first week that the library has returned to our pre-pandemic hours of pre-March 2020 of opening Monday through Thursday, 9:30 to 9:30, Friday and Saturday from 10 to 6, and Sundays from 12 to 6. So if you're local, please come in and visit us. So this is very exciting news. And Jim also has very exciting news for you all. So without further ado, we're going to get started. As a reminder, please keep yourself on mute. But if you have any kind of feedback, any kind of, want to clap or whatnot for Jim, the chat is open. Please go ahead and use the chat function and we're going to get started. So please, everyone, welcome Jim Jimirro.
Hey, okay. Thank you, Alice. Hi, everybody from all over the country. Happy to be back here talking about the greatest music ever written on Jim J's Jukebox. I want to start by thanking the people at the wonderful Beverly Hills Public Library. Some of you may not know, I've been doing this presentation at the library for a quarter of a century, and they have been always wonderful in person before and now hosting and setting up and being very, very conscientious about setting up these Zooms. That's Alice, who you just met, Max and Sandra. Thank you very much. This has been a wonderful experience, and I look forward to another quarter of a century indeed. Picked out a lot of good music for you tonight, so let us just dig right in and get started with song number one. And I start out song number one by saying Brooks Bowman died too young. Let me explain. A lot of universities, including my alma mater, Penn State, have thespian or musical clubs where they do original musicals. Penn State Thespians have been doing them for 100 years. There's a notable one at Columbia University, which was attended by, among other people, Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein II, and I think Larry Hart as well. One of the most prominent of these clubs was at Princeton University in New Jersey, the Princeton Triangle Club. They do an annual, and have done and will continue to do, an annual original production, a musical production. And the one that was in 1934 was called Stags at Bay, a song which has become an absolute standard in the canon of the Great American Songbook, was actually written by Brooks Bowman for this show, Stags at Bay, at the Princeton Triangle Club in 1934. He was merely an undergraduate, and as you will soon see in the hands of Frank Sinatra, wrote one of the great classic pop songs of all time. The song, once it was written in the mid-1930s, actually became a staple. The Princeton Tiger Tones are a group, an a cappella vocal group, much like the Whiffenpoofs of Yale, a little better known, and they began to sing East of the Sun in their show in the 1930s, and they sing it every time because obviously it's the most popular single song that ever came out of the Triangle Club. By the way, the song East of the Sun, West of the Moon was inspired by Brooks Bowman by a Norwegian fairy tale, which had a scene with a prince and a stepmother singing a song and having the line East of the Sun, West of the Moon. In a way, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but in the context of this song and what that song is trying to convey in terms of love and romance, it definitely has all the meaning that it can have in the world. And by the way, as you will soon see, the lyrics in this song, which you've probably heard, but I'm going to analyze them for you a little bit, actually have a kind of a fairy tale feeling about them. One quick digression, because we're talking about Princeton. Actually, we went to Princeton one day to see the university and to see where Albert Einstein lived and worked, because that's where he lived and worked for many years of his life. And I just have to tell you parenthetically that it was interesting that Albert Einstein's house, where he lived, where he worked, where he resided when he was at Princeton University, has no sign on it. And I couldn't find anybody at Princeton University that day who actually cared that Albert Einstein lived in that house, which was just adjacent to the campus. But I digress. Brooks Bowman, as I say, died too young. He was born in 1913. He had done two productions at the Triangle Club, one in 1934 called Stags at Bay, and then the one here, the other one called What a Relief. Then when he got out of school, he went briefly to Hollywood, tried to work in movies, didn't work out too well, and then went back to New York City and created a songwriting team. They were terrific. They were great. And by the way, in their early 20s, they already had one hit record on East of the Sun. And so he was actually offered a contract to do music with a publisher in New York City. That was in 1937, October of 1937. The contract was ready to go. They had agreed to it. They were going to have a signing ceremony in a couple of days. He was driving along Route 403 in New York State, Putnam County Road, and the Catwalk Road intersection, had an accident and died. He was 26 or 27 years old. We have no idea what would have happened had he lived, except we can guess without a shadow of a doubt that many, many wonderful songs would have come out of that team. But he left us with one song, and it was a wonderful song indeed. When this song was written, it became right away a standard. Hal Kemp, the great Hal Kemp Orchestra, in the late 1930s, actually recorded that song, and that really catapulted it into hit away from the Princeton campus. And then, interestingly enough, in 1992, all those years later, Tony Bennett did a tribute album to Frank Sinatra called Perfectly Frank. Now, if you're going to do a tribute album to Frank Sinatra, you got a real big problem, which is what songs are you going to choose? Because he obviously had hundreds of worthy songs. Well, he had 12 on the album, did Tony Bennett, and one of them, interestingly enough, was in fact East of the Sun, which Frank Sinatra had recorded two times, once in 1941 with Tommy Dorsey, and once in 1961, the version of which you are going to hear. Interestingly enough, Charlie Parker, Charlie Yardbird Parker, recorded the song 6 times, including 2 live recordings, one at the Royal Roost Bar and Club in New York City, and one at Birdland. Now, the interesting thing about Birdland, where he recorded a live version of East of the Sun, did Charlie Parker, is that Birdland was named after him. Does anybody know how and why it became named after him? Bird, Charlie Bird Parker. I will tell you. Because Charlie Parker loved chicken. Now, in those days, chicken was a yard bird. They call them yard birds, right? Because if you were a decent person living in the 30s or 40s, you had a chicken running around your backyard, which gave you a certain amount of sustenance. He liked chicken so much that they ended up calling him Yard Bird as a nickname. And then they shortened it to Bird. And then so it became Charlie Bird Parker. And that's how that all happened. But can you imagine one jazz man, a great jazz man, recording the song 6 times? Now, I have another interesting digression for you. I've known this story about Brooks Bowman for years. And I figure, well, that's pretty, sui generis. That's pretty unique that there would be something at the Princeton Triangle Club that would fit into the story of the Great American Songbook. Well, interestingly enough, 3 days ago, I'm reading something, and I came up with something else that you probably know about that's related to the Great American Songbook that had its genesis in the Princeton Triangle Club. It had to do with this. In the 1930s, they had a song in one of their shows that never really became a big hit song. Maybe you never even heard of it, called Day After Day. That was the name of the song. It was not to be confused with Day by Day or Day In and Day Out or What a Difference a Day Made. All of those you probably know. You may not know Day After Day. It's a relatively obscure song, but it did come out of a Princeton Triangle Club show, and it did come to the attention of a young girl by the name of Doris Kappelhoff. Doris Kappelhoff was born in Ohio. She was a young singer, a damn good one, may I say, and she was doing a gig in Cincinnati. It was her first really big deal professional gig. This was during the height of the big band era. It was a local band in Cincinnati, and she was doing a gig. It was this band, can't remember the name of it, doesn't even matter, with a featured female vocalist, Doris Kappelhoff. She sang in that evening, Day After Day, the song which was written for a Princeton Triangle Club show. At the end of the evening, it was clear that she was going to be could possibly be a star. And the band leader said to her, you know, if you're going to be a star, it's not a good idea to call yourself Doris Kaploff. We got to figure something else out. And she said, I agree with that. They mused for a while, and I think the band leader said to her, Doris, how about you just sang a song called Day After Day? Why don't you just go ahead and call yourself Doris Day? Doris loved the alliteration. She loved the simplicity, and she called herself Doris Day. So that Doris Day became Doris Day because of a song that was written for a Princeton Triangle Club show. I find that particularly interesting. Well, Frank Sinatra recorded this song twice, as I said. He recorded it in 1940 with the Tommy Dorsey Band. And by the way, in that band, Bunny Berrigan was playing trumpet, Buddy Rich was playing the drums, and a lot of wonderful things were happening. And all those charts during that time, or most of those charts during that time, were written by a young man by the name of Cy Oliver, wonderful orchestrator. 20 years later, in 1961, Frank Sinatra is now at the peak of his power. He started his own record label because he wanted the independence of not having to work for Columbia or Capitol and the likes of them. Started a company called Reprise. He did one album called Ring a Ding Ding, which was a big hit. That was his first Reprise album. And his second album, when he did Reprise in 1961, May 3rd, 1961, when he recorded it, was called I Remember Tommy. In which Frank Sinatra actually went back and re-recorded 12 of the great songs that he had done with the Tommy Dorsey Band, all with brand new arrangements by the great Cy Oliver. One of the songs on that album that he did, and he had a lot of things to choose from. Buddy Rich, I'm with you, George. He had a lot of things to choose from, and it shows East of the Sun. And that was a song that was on the album. So that's how we got to record it twice. Now, when I Remember Tommy came out, it's a wonderful album, by the way, of all these great songs that Sinatra had done in the early 1940s. Every one of those 12 sides on that album charted, every one of them. Two of them, there were two sides. There were 5 two sides, and then there were 2 one sides. So there were 12 songs on that album, all of which he'd recorded with Tommy Dorsey, re-recorded I Remember Tommy in 1961, and every one of those 12 songs got on to the Billboard Top 100 chart. A remarkable feat, to say the least. The song East of the Sun is a wonderful song, and it's ephemeral in a certain way. It's ephemeral. It's a dream. It's an idea. It's a concept. It says, Irving Berlin says, a new way to say that I love you. East of the sun and west of the moon, we'll build a dream house so lovely, near to the sun in the day, near to the moon at night. See how they complete everything. We'll live in a lovely way, dear, living our love in the pale moonlight. And then there's an album, a lyric here, and I want you to pay attention to it musically, because this lyric and the melody is such that it is impossible to not to swing this. You cannot sing this without, if you sing this without swinging it, you're going to have to be banned from music for a couple of months. Just you and I, forever and a day, love will not die, we'll keep it that way. Now, when you hear him sing, we'll keep it that way, you just get that feeling, and you're going to know that this is a swing song. And Sinatra, of course, loves more than anything swing. And then up among the stars, we'll find, back to the celestial idea, a harmony of life to a lovely tune, east of the sun and west of the moon. The celestial theme is there all the way. This arrangement is a gas. Frank Sinatra is a gas. A couple of things I want to point out to you about what you're about to hear. Sinatra adds a word to the song. Instead of singing east of the sun, west of the moon, which is the first line, he sings well east of the sun. Well, I'm here to tell you, when Frank Sinatra sings well, he is already in the groove of this song. He is already there. He's already in the pocket. He's already in the groove. He knows exactly where he is going, and he gets there in the next 3.5 minutes, because there's just something about the way this guy got into the pocket of these songs, picking up these great arrangements and just grooving with it in certain ways. So when he says, well, you can just hold on to your hats, because this thing is going to, and by the way, this is not a particularly fast arrangement. A lot of people think it has to be fast to swing. Of course, it does not. This swings with a more driving, slow, inevitable kind of pace that Cy Oliver creates. Frank Sinatra always takes liberties, and for me, they virtually always work. So here, near to the sun of the day, near to the moon at night, Frank Sinatra changes near to crazy moon at night. That's Frank Sinatra being a little flip, a little, and a lot of swagger, shall we say. And then you'll notice that at the end of it, you'll understand this in a couple of minutes. Frank Sinatra loves this song. And because he loves the song, he can't quit. He doesn't know how to give it up. You'll see what I mean. When you hear the very end of this song, you are going to hear a little bit of a drum conclusion. Cy Oliver added that at the time of the recording as kind of homage to Buddy Rich, who had done it in a similar arrangement, but a different arrangement, but similar in the 1941 version. So when you hear that drum, you're going to hear a little bit of an homage to the great Buddy Rich. When you hear Sinatra here, 1961, right? He's at the peak of everything, including his confidence, of course. And to say that he has a lot of confidence is an understatement. I think what Sinatra has here is swagger. I think that works for him. It's a good swagger, and it comes across in his playfulness, and it comes across in his surety of this thing. So, and by the way, a reminder for those of you who have not been here before, you're going to see photographs on the screen. These are simply photographs of things that I have mentioned along the way, so that when you'll see Brooke Bowman, you'll see Sinatra, you'll see Cy Oliver, so that you can kind of get a feeling of these people. I think you may even see Albert Einstein's house, but I did it a long time ago. But in any event, that's what those pictures are. I think it help you kind of get let's say a multimedia presentation of this music. So here we go. This is Cy Oliver, Frank Sinatra's 17 of the greatest musicians in Los Angeles and east of the sun by the great young Brooke Bowman.
Well, east of the sun and west of the moon, we'll build a dream house of love, dear, near to the sun in the day, crazy moon at night. We'll live in a lovely way, dear, living on love and pale moonlight, just you and I, forever and a day. Love will not die, we'll keep it that way. Up among the stars we'll find a harmony of life to a lovely tune. East of the sun and west of the moon, dear. East of the sun and west of the moon.
Hi, Oliver.
Just you and I, forever and a day. Love will not die, we will keep it that way. Way up among the stars we'll find a harmony life the sun and west of the moon, dear. East of the sun and west of the moon.
What a gas, huh? Wasn't that great? Wait.
Hey, up among the stars we'll find a harmony, life to a lovely tune. East of the sun and west of the moon, dear. East of the sun and west of the moon.
You gotta love that, folks, huh? Oh, wait.
Well, up among the stars we'll find a harmony of life to a lovely tune. East of the sun and west of the moon, dear. East of the sun and west of the moon.
Buddy Rich. Okay. Stan Kenton always was special, and he was always different. Now, I'm here to acknowledge that of all the great big bands, they were all different in a way. If you listen carefully to Les Brown, he sounds different than Count Basie. And if you listen carefully to Tommy Dorsey, he sounds different than Jimmy Dorsey. I get that. But of all of them, there was a certain similarity among the swing bands. I'm not talking about what they used to call sweet bands or Mickey Mouse bands, Shep Fields and Guy Lombardo, but the swing bands all had, they were within a range, I would say, even though I can tell the difference between Les Brown and Count Basie, but they were within a range. Stan Kenton was never in that range. Of all of them, he was sui generis. There's no doubt about it. He went a different way, different harmonies, different orchestrations, different instrumentation, different everything. And he was essentially an experimental band. He was wonderful. I loved the band. I had a chance to see it many, many times. I loved that band. And he was, as I say, unique in all of the world. Because that was the case, his singers were unique as well. He was not the typical Helen O'Connell or Helen Forrest. There was a different kind of feeling about that. And we're going to explore that a little bit right now. Stan Kenton, by way of background, had a swing band in the early 40s, pretty much like any other band. And then he joined Capitol Records. Capitol Records was brand new in 1943, founded by, among other people, the great lyricist Johnny Mercer. And when he went to Capitol Records, he had a new freedom kind of there. And that freedom, by the way, was engendered by Johnny Mercer, who started Capitol Records for the very purpose of giving great artists a lot of freedom. Well, Stan Kenton embraced that opportunity with a vengeance, and he did all kinds of experimental things starting in 1943. Sometimes he had an orchestra with as many as 39 pieces, which is about more than double. You know, a large big band is 17 pieces, so this is more than double. He used mellophones a lot. He did a lot of experimentation, which was fairly early with Latin rhythms. And he was always very precise. He was always very loud, and he was always very original. And I loved it. And especially, I loved the great, deep, rich brass tones that he got, the deep, rich trombone tones. They just would send chills up and down my spine. They still do. He had many great arrangements. The two most important arrangements that he had were Pete Rugolo and Bill Holman. In the old days, on LPs, they really had very interesting, creative album covers. And one of them, Pete Rugolo had written a lot of songs, and Stan Kenton did an album of Pete Rugolo songs. And the title of the album was Kenton Plays Rugolo, and Pete Rugolo and Stan Kenton were on the cover playing a game of chess. I have that here somewhere. I could show it to you. Stan Kenton died too young. Not as young as Brooke Bowman, obviously, but he was actually in my home state of Pennsylvania, in Reading, of all places, Pennsylvania, in 1977. He was going to the parking lot after a gig in Reading, fell down, and never really totally recovered. and died 2 years later in 1979. One of the interesting things about Stan Kenton, by the way, one of the many interesting things about Stan Kenton is he never, in his will, he prohibited them from having a ghost band. You may remember, and this is an interesting time because it helped promulgate the big band era. When the great big band leaders passed away or retired, they would keep their band together, which meant really keeping the orchestrations together, right? The idea is the orchestrations. So they would all have these ghost bands, which could promulgate the band. And I'm going to give you some names because these names are all very important to me because I went to see all of these bands, which were fronted by other people after the original people had left for whatever reason. So that Frank Foster used to front the Count Basie band. Jimmy Dorsey was Lee Castle. Some of you may remember these names. They're big names to me. Jimmy Dorsey was Warren Covington, and the Jimmy Dorsey Orchestra. Duke Ellington was his cousin Mercer Ellington. So you went to see the Duke Ellington Orchestra headed by Mercer Ellington. Benny Goodman was Irby Green. Harry James was Art Depew. Kay Kaiser, the College of Musical Knowledge, that was Harry Babbitt. Guy Lombardo was his brother, Victor Lombardo, and Glenn Miller for years, because Glenn Miller died very young during World War II, as you may remember, and that was Tex Beneke, who fronted that band probably for 25 or 30 years. So there were these ghost bands, and it was wonderful because the bands could stay together. You could hear the original arrangements, and you could promulgate the great band era. Stan Kenton never had a ghost band because he said in his will he did not want a ghost band. He wanted that band to die when he died. And so there was never a Stan Kenton band by Carl Jader or Frank Rossellino or other people that had played with Stan Kenton. Never. What could happen is people could get the Stan Kenton charts and they could play those charts in the style of Stan Kenton, but there was never an opportunity for people to say, this is the Stan Kenton band. That all ended in 1979 when Stan Kenton passed away. So Stan Kenton did have amazing singers, and they were all wonderful. Every one of them was wonderful, and every one of them was different than the other great singers. And by the way, Doris Day was a big band singer, right? She had Sentimental Journey, 1945, with Les Brown and his band of renown. The first singer for the Stan Kenton band, who was marvelous, she was only there for 11 months, by the way, was Anita O'Day. Anita O'Day was with the Gene Krupa band, so you know she's already swinging, this gal. And she joined Stan Kenton in 1944. And in May of 1944, Anita O'Day, brand new with the band, gave Stan Kenton his very first hit for Capitol, which he had joined just 1 year earlier, called "And Her Tears Flowed Like Wine." So that was a big deal for Anita O'Day and Stan Kenton. But Anita O'Day left after 11 months. Why? She did not like the Stan Kenton culture. She said that the Stan Kenton band was too straight. She said that all these guys do when they're not playing is read books. She didn't like the fact that they didn't do what band guys are supposed to do. Now you can use your imagination on that, but the Gene Krupa band probably exemplified that. These guys were rowdy, they were hard drinking, hard playing, whatever, and she liked that. And somehow there was a seriousness about these Kenton guys. They would behave themselves. They would read books. They would be square, and she didn't like that. She wanted to be around a different kind of culture, and she was going to leave. And then they came to her and said, "We want you to do a song called Rum and Coca-Cola." Well, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And she said, "I'm not going to do Rum and Coca-Cola." And so that became the reason she didn't like the band anyway, because of the culture. She respected the band, don't get me wrong, but it was the culture. So that she said, "I'm not going to do Rum and Coca-Cola." And so she left the band rather than do that song. She wanted to leave anyway. And of course, Rum and Coca-Cola became a massive hit for the Andrews Sisters. It might have been that for Anita O'Day, but we will never know. And what did she do after she left the Kenton band in late 1944? She went back to Gene Krupa, where the guys misbehaved, and it made her very happy. She was replaced by the great June Christy. the Misty Miss Christie, who joined the band at age 19 of years. She was what I would call a Midwestern sweetheart. Her name was Shirley Luster. And when she got to the Kenton band, and he liked her, who wouldn't like her? If you ever heard June Christie sing, and Stan Kenton said, June, your name sounds like a shampoo. So we got to change that name. They came up with Christie. Do not know the story on that, but it became June Christie. And that enabled us to call her the Misty Miss Christie. June Christie had 2 hits with the Stan Kenton Big Band. One was Shoe Fly Pie and Apple Pan Dowdy. And the other was a much more serious song, a ballad called Willow Weep for Me. By the early 1950s, June Christie was big time, right? This was a heyday, 45, 49, that area. So she left to go solo. Before she left, she went to Stan and she said, I got another recommendation for you. Another Midwesterner, another sweet Midwestern person. Her name is Chris Connor. Chris Connor had been with the Claude Thornhill band, and Claude Thornhill, his theme song was called Snowflakes, and he had a group. You know, all these guys had groups, right? The Modernaires, the Pied Pipers, all that stuff. Well, his group was called the Snowflakes. She actually sang with the Snowflakes, and then she also did a whole solo bit. She had a big hit with Stan Kenton, which is an absolute standard among jazz aficionados, called All About Ronnie. All About Ronnie. She only stayed for 5 months, believe it or not. She did great. She wasn't unhappy, but she hated the road. And Stan Kenton loved the road. Yeah, by the way, at the end of Stan Kenton's life, for the last 3 or 4 years of his life, he didn't even have a home. He was on the road 325 days a year. He lived on that band bus and in motels and in hotels. He didn't care about how, he just wanted to be around music, and that's what he was. And she couldn't stand that. I mean, it was a tough life, of course, especially in those days. Roads weren't nearly as good, all that kind of stuff. And then the next singer became a woman named Ann Richards. Ann Richards was a singer that came to him, and she actually married Stan Kenton in 1955. But the interesting thing about Ann Richards, aside from the fact that she was a wonderful singer, in the feeling of Oneida O'Day and June Christie and Chris Connor, there was Ann Richards just as good as them. And she ended up in the 1970s when I was here working, playing at the Bel Air Hotel. And I could go up, Stone Canyon Road there and walk into the Bel Air Hotel and buy a drink, and I could listen to Ann Richards singing, which was wonderful when it lasted. But it didn't last very long because she committed suicide in 1982 at the young age of 47. I don't know why, but I do know that there was a lot of controversy about that. Apparently, there was a suicide note that seemed inauthentic. Stan Kenton believed that there was something else going on there. He got very involved in it, but it remains to this day unresolved why she did take her own life, if she in fact did. We're going to hear a song by Chris Connor, the 3rd soloist in the band. She left Kenton very early, as I indicated to you, and then she ended up doing 2 solo albums, which both of which became classics. One, Chris Connor sings Lullabies of Birdland, and one, Chris Connor sings Lullabies for Lovers. Both of them became either #1 or #2 on the Billboard album jazz chart. They are considered absolute jazz classics. So that by 1956, there was a new record label for jazz called Atlantic. Chris Connor was the first white singer, female singer, that they hired because she was that good. And then she was eclipsed, like so many others, by rock and roll. And then the rest is history. But her albums live on, and thank goodness for that. One of the things about Chris Connor, she has very little vibrato. Vibrato is an interesting thing. It occurs naturally in the voice. And if you ever go to Brazil or listen to a Brazilian singer, one of the things you will notice, you say, they sound different. And you may not even know why. Well, one of the reasons they sound different is because they don't use vibrato at all. I've been listening to a lot of Johnny Mathis later, and I like Johnny Mathis's early hits in the 50s, Wonderful, Wonderful, and 12th of Never, and all that wonderful pop hits. But later, when he became became a singer of the Great American Songbook, he overemphasized and exaggerated and hyperbolic vibrato. And it really starts to drive me crazy after a while. But you don't have to worry about that with Chris Connor, because she didn't like vibrato very much and didn't use it. And by the way, she being born at Kansas City, when she was coming of age in Kansas City, it was a hotbed of jazz. Kansas City, came up from New Orleans to Chicago, but it made a couple of really important stops on the way: Kansas City, St. Louis, so forth. And she was in that hot band. And she actually sang with her college orchestra, and they would do Stan Kenton arrangements. And that's how she got to love Stan Kenton. And the rest there is history. By the way, you may be wondering, did Stan Kenton ever have any male singers? He did. One was Gene Howard, the other was Red Doris, but neither of them got any traction. Capitol Records didn't seem to be interested, so that Stan Kenton became very known for his female singers, and not known. You probably never even heard of Gene Howard, and who would blame you if you hadn't? By the way, as an addendum, so he did have a couple of male singers, but they were footnotes, afterthoughts. He did hire one black singer later in 1963 called Gene Turner, which was just another interesting footnote. So Kenton did not swing. Dissonance, innovation, sound, complex arrangements. And the interesting thing about Kenton, and it worked against him in a way, see, people, the big band era was about dancing, really. I mean, I like to listen to big band music, but it was dance. It was dance. You went dance, right? Dancing. But Stan Kenton didn't want that. He wanted people to listen, and he got mad. He got mad when people were dancing. He wanted people to listen to his music, and that was just the way he was. And if he weren't that way, he wouldn't have been as wonderful as he was. A couple of three little absolutely apropos of nothing anecdotes about Stan Kenton. One of the things I loved about him, he was a tall guy, about 6'5", I think, and sit at that piano. And when he was in front of the piano, by the way, he ended up almost deaf because that band was so loud. He was in front of that band for all these years, all these days. But when he wasn't playing the piano, when he didn't have a piano part, he loved that. He would look at the audience, and I'll never forget the look on his face, this self-satisfied, contented look on his face, where he was essentially saying through his smile and that look to the audience, isn't that wonderful? Aren't we the luckiest people in the world to have an opportunity to listen to this kind of music? And he meant it. He was enjoying it, and he was so thrilled that he could share it with other people. The second thing I remember is the smallest story you'll ever hear, but I love this. I went to see him once, and he had a drummer. His name was Jerry McKenzie. And he looked like he was about 14 years old. And some wise guy between numbers yelled, "Stan Kenton, how old is that drummer?" And Kenton said, "Old enough." I remember that. And I'll remember one more thing, which was a personal recollection. I was living in New York, working for CBS, happiest guy in the world, right? Love to be at CBS, love to be in New York. And in the summer of whenever that was, Stan Kenton was giving free concerts in Central Park. I mean, how lucky can one guy be? So I walk over to Central Park, and by the way, you can walk to Central Park. And I got there early, got a front row seat. And I remember learning that Stan Kenton he started with a slow number. He always used to say that he got to Hollywood, you got to start out big, scare people, because he were big with his band, he'd knock you off the stage. So he'd start off slow, and then he'd grow. So he used to open for many, many years with a song called "Here's That Rainy Day." Now I'm telling you, if you ever want to hear Stan Kenton do "Here's That Rainy Day," you're going for a treat, because this song, he takes about an hour and a half to get through the first 32 bars or measure, whatever, 16 measures. I mean, it's just this pulsating, driving, big brass, all the trombones underneath. And here's that. And Sammy Kahn said that's one of the 10 greatest songs ever written. And I think it is. So I just love that song. Well, that night, I learned that "Here's That Rainy Day" was number 43 in his band book. And by the way, that's why we call songs numbers. You ever think about that before you play that number? Well, the reason you say play that number, because that was the number of the book of the song in the book. So Kenton would not go to his band people and say, let's play Frenesy. He would say, let's play 45, and then they get out. 45 was Frenesy. So I learned that "Here's That Rainy Day" was 43. So through the years, and probably after that time, I probably saw Stanton 50 times. And every time I went to see Stan Kenton, I say, Stan, play 43. And he would play, Here's That Rainy Day. So, and he never didn't play it for me. So that was really a wonderful thing. So those are my three little anecdotes about Stan Kenton, who I dearly love. You're going to hear a song called You Stepped Out of a Dream by Chris Connor on the album she did after she left the Stan Kenton Band. Written in 1940 by Nasio Herb Brown, music, and Gus Kahn, lyrics, for the 1941 musical Ziegfeld Girl. Now, in this film, the song is sung by Tony Martin, and it is sung by Tony Martin as Lana Turner is descending down the staircase of this musical. And you can imagine what the staircase was like with the name Ziegfeld attached to it. Now, Lana Turner actually never sang that song, but she came down that staircase to Tony Martin singing that song. So that became her theme for the rest of her life. So every time she'd walk into a club, Copacabana, or Latin Quarter, or whatever, they would go into You Stepped Out of a Dream. Nasio Herb Brown was most famous for writing Singing in the Rain. He was born in New Mexico, came out here to Los Angeles to become an MGM staff writer, and wrote many, many movies and television shows, including, by the way, all the music for the TV series of Hopalong Cassidy. He also wrote a couple of other songs, which you've heard of, which are worth mentioning. All I Do Is Dream of You the Whole Night Through, another Dream song. Should I Reveal Exactly How I Feel? That's a good song. And You Were Meant for Me. Gus Kahn, who wrote the words to this wonderful song, was born in Germany. He came to the United States and went into vaudeville and had a real big hit called I'll See You in My Dreams, and another one called It Had to Be You. I wandered around and finally found somebody new, that one. And there was a movie about his life, a biopic, as it were, and it was called, appropriately enough, I'll See You in My Dreams. The biggest hit he had, one of the biggest hit he had, let's put it that way, was My Buddy, which was written in 1922, believe it or not, with Walter Donaldson. Interesting little tidbit. Kahn's son, Gus Kahn's son, is married to Groucho Marx's daughter. The son of Gus Kahn, who wrote the lyrics of the song you're about to hear, is married to the daughter of Groucho Marx, and they have a child named Andy Marx, who I happen to know. So Andy Marx, my acquaintance, is the grandson of Gus Kahn and Groucho Marx, both of them. Not bad. You Stepped Out of a Dream is an unusual format. It's a simple lyric. You stepped out of a dream, you too wonderful to be what you seem. Well, that's pretty straightforward. And then we got a number of rhetorical questions here. Could there be eyes like yours? Don't answer that. It's a rhetorical question. Could there be lips like yours? Could there be smiles like yours, honest and truly? And then let's stay with the stepped out theory. You stepped out of a cloud. I want to take you away from the crowd and have you all to myself, alone and apart, out of a dream and into my heart. Instead of the traditional A, B, A pattern, this is A, B, A, C. And you can feel that if you care about that kind of lyrical pattern. This is a transcription from the LP that I have of the original Chris Connor album on which this song is recorded. So one of the wonderful things about what you're about to hear, listen carefully if you can, you'll hear the wonderful LP scratch to begin it. That's my LP, scratched through many years of my playing it, and you can hear that as an introduction to the song. We're not going to ever take that out, by the way. This has an ephemeral, you stepped out of a dream, that sounds ephemeral to me. So you're going to hear a celeste, you're going to hear a wonderful harp, especially as we get into the second time around, you're going to hear this beautiful harp creating a kind of ephemeral, celestial kind of feel. And I think you'll like it very much. Now, one thing about this song, I will tell you, it is slow. But I'm hoping this, that you feel about this song the way I felt the first time I heard it, if you haven't heard it. When I first heard this song by this woman, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe anything could be so glorious And even though it's painstakingly slow, it works. So just allow yourself to get into the feeling of this song. And even though she's going to go slow, she's going to get where she wants to go at the end of the day. And I think that I trust that you're going to feel the way I did. I just fell in love with the song. I couldn't believe the glory of what I was hearing. So this is the great Chris Connor, chick singer, as they used to call him in those days, number 3 for the Stan Kenton Band, and You Stepped Out of a Dream. Here we go.
You stepped out of a dream. You are too wonderful to be what you seem. Could there be eyes like yours? Could there be lips like yours? Could there be smiles like yours? Honest and truly, you stepped out of a cloud. I want to take you away from the crowd and have you all to myself, alone and apart. Out of a dream, safe in my heart. You stepped out of a cloud. I want to take you away, away from the crowd and have you all to myself, alone and apart, out of a dream, safe in my heart.
Ah, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Now we're going to have a little change of pace in terms of technology. We're going to go from recorded music to live music. Rick Lip has become a staple on our Zooms. And there he is, or about standing by in the wings, as they say, waiting for his cue. So Rick is going to play and sing for you. This is a list song. List songs were actually created by Cole Porter first, but this is another kind of list song. When you hear the lyrics of this song, you'll see why it is a list song. This song also has a very interesting verse, and I will point out to you that Rick is going to do that verse. So without, as they say in show business, further ado, here is piano and sing man Rick Lip to do What About You?
When a girl meets boy, life can be a joy, but the note they end on may depend on little pleasures they may share. So let us compare. I like New York in June. How about you? I love a Gershwin tune. How about you? I love a fireside when a storm is new. I like potato chips, moonlight and motor trips. How about you? I'm mad about good books. I can't get my fill. And Boris Karloff's looks, ooh, they give me a chill. Holding hands in the movie show when all the lights are low may not be new, but I like it. How about you? Eastwood movie, I can't get my fill. And Frank Sinatra's voice, it still gives me a thrill. Holding hands in the movie show when all the lights are low may not be new, but I like it. How about you? Thank you.
Wonderful, Rick. Yeah, that was just terrific, Rick. Thank you so much. By the way, if anybody wants, in little things, when the thing, and somebody's looks gives me a thrill, right? Would be interesting. Everybody comes up with their own idea, right? I mean, this is probably the first time in history that Rick has come up, anybody's come up with Boris Karloff, but then they don't give him a thrill, give him a chill. That was nice, Rick. But somebody ought to, here's a master's dissertation for you. Come up with all the names that people have used through the years on that song to say whose looks gives them a thrill, because everybody has their own idea. I actually don't know what the original was. I'm going to look that up in point of fact, but people have been fooling around with that for a long time, and I would like to know all the names that have ever been used by anybody that ever recorded that song in terms of who gives them a thrill. Anybody want to take on that project? Let me know. We're going to do something now a little bit different. That's an Irving Berlin song, as it turns out. One of the things that I think is true about music, especially music that we do here, is that like movies, it can tell you about the world in which it was created. In some ways, movies, theatrical movies, are more as interesting historical records as documentaries, maybe more. When documentaries are done, people have a point of view often. They have a bias maybe, and they're trying to create something, through their own mind about the way that it was. That's okay, great, love it, love documentaries. But when people do a movie, in 1939, they're not trying to tell you anything about 1939. They're trying to make a movie that happens to take place in 1939. So that what you see in that movie is a tremendous representation of the world the way it was. And when I'm watching movies from that era, I'm looking at the dining room table and what they have on the table and what I mean, there's so many things. Well, the same thing to a different extent is true with music. There are things that happen in music that can only happen at the time in which the song was written in often cases. And often this music talks about a simpler time, a different kind of neighborhood. And this song is called Let's Take an Old-Fashioned Walk. And I'm going to tell you a lot of interesting things about this song. Now, there's no power walk going on here. There are no $150 sneakers involved in this walk. There's no Fitbit on your wrist. It is an old-fashioned walk. Now, I can't even imagine, I live in the section of Los Angeles. We can take walks around here, but they're old-fashioned walks. They're just not. Old-fashioned walks have to be in a small town. They have to have a lot of maple and elm trees around. Else it's not old-fashioned. I walk a lot in New York, but there's nothing about my walk in New York, which is old-fashioned. So the very fact that somebody could talk about an old-fashioned walk already tells me something about this era. And I like that very much. But when I think about that and how things have changed, I always second guess myself, because when I talk about how things used to be not better than they are now, if I make the mistake of saying that, I always bring myself up short by reciting a lyric from Bye Bye Birdie, which was mid-1950s. Why can't they be like we were, perfect in every way? What's the matter with kids today? Well, there's a lyric in the 50s, which we consider to be, that was the nuclear decade, right? That was a nuclear family. That was like perfection world. And yet they're writing a song about kids. What's the matter with kids today? So maybe it was ever thus, right? Maybe not what we feel it was ever thus. I don't know. I don't have it. All I know is that nobody today is taking old-fashioned walks. It's just not going to happen. And I love that. I love that whole the whole point. Well, a prefatory thing I want to say to you about this song is you cannot copyright a title. You just can't. Not a title of a song, not a title of a movie, not a title of a book. There are a lot of good reasons for that, and you can probably figure out what they are. So you can't copyright a title. So I'm going to show you that there are two songs in the universe called Let's Take an Old-Fashioned Walk. The first song, called Let's Take an Old-Fashioned Walk, was written in 1907 by no less a man than the great George M. Cohan. And he wrote a song called Let's Take an Old-Fashioned Walk. That song was recorded by two really, really popular singers of the era, Ada Jones and Billy Murray. Now, here's an interesting thing. The number one song in 1907 was a song called Nobody by Bert Williams, the great black singer Bert Williams. And he turned out in 1907 with that song Nobody to be the first black singer to ever chart. In those days, chart was sync music and whatever. Then the number two was Let's Take an Old-Fashioned Walk, which was a duet between a woman, Ada Jones, and a man, Billy Murray. And she became the first woman to chart. So that in 1907, when they were charting cylinder recordings, they had a first black charter and the first woman charter. And by the way, apropos of this information on this first song, I hope Harry Aarons is with us today. He has a marvelous collection of great cylinders from the early part of the last century. And you're going to hear something that he found for me, because he finds all this stuff in the most wonderful way. Ada was born in 1873, died in 1922, and she was one of the earliest females to ever be recorded. You're going to hear one of the first females to ever be recorded. And she was actually born in England, as it turns out, moved to Philadelphia at age 6, and did a lot of recording through the time she moved here, until she died early in 1922. Billy Murray, her cohort in this duet, was actually from Denver. He was known as the Denver Nightingale, and he was a prolific recording artist as well. So that if you think about it, it's so long ago now. I mean, just think, Ada Jones died 100 years ago this year. But these were big time. This was way before the beginning of swing, way before it was really kind of the dawning of the Great American Songbook era, which I think started in 1915. But that's another story. But But these people were big in those days, and of course they're consigned to history at this moment. And by the way, just a parenthetical about Burt Fields, who was charting there in 1907. He was considered to be W.C. Fields. Burt Williams. W.C. Fields, people would say, was the best comic in the world, except for Burt Williams. That's how well regarded this guy was. So we had an interesting man there. Burt Williams, and then Ada Jones and Billy Murray, all in the great musical year of 1907. This song, the second version of this song, not recorded by Ada Jones and Billy Murray, recorded by Perry Como, the great Perry Como, was written 42 years later in 1949. Something else happened there, and that was that Irving Berlin wrote a musical called Miss Liberty. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Miss Liberty. Prior to 1946, Broadway musicals were pretty much local ideas. But in 1946, something happened. Annie Get Your Gun happened. This was the great musical starring, of course, Ethel Merman. And that became really the first musical to have a national audience. Things were going on. Original cast albums were being developed. They were in their infancy, but it was changing things away. There were touring companies for the first time as transportation became a little bit easier. So that in some ways, Annie Get Your Gun put its toe in the water as the first musical to become kind of a national phenomenon rather than just something that was more or less consigned to New York City. So that made a major change. Well, once that change happened, people got excited about that change, and the afterburners were lit just several years later, in 1949, early 1949, when Rodgers and Hammerstein came out with South Pacific. Coming on the heels of what they had seen with Annie Get Your Gun, they believed that South Pacific could become this great national musical theater phenomenon, which of course it did. By the way, and they promoted it and marketed it as such. It was really the first super musical that we have, and it's in our conscience to this day. They had $400,000 advance ticket sale in 1949, and then after it opened, 700,000 more in one day. And by the way, just because that's such a hallmark of Richard Rodgers and Hammerstein did not like opening night cast parties, but for some reason they had a feeling about South Pacific, and they had a cast party at the St. Regis roof, and they had ordered 200 copies of the New York Times to see what was going on, because in those days, unlike today, absolutely unlike today, we have some recent instances to prove this. The New York Times is no longer the arbiter. In those days, if the New York Times said this to you, you had real big trouble. Those days are over. It's more egalitarian. But in those days, that was a big deal. 200 copies in the New York Times, and rave reviews. And Brooks Atkinson, who was the revered theater critic for the New York Times, said, South Pacific is as lively, warm, fresh, and beautiful as we all hoped it would be. And the hope came, of course, because Rodgers and Hammerstein had already done wonderful things to that point, and they were looking for the next wonderful thing, and it happened. On the heels of Annie Get Your Gun, catapulted even further ahead by South Pacific, along comes the third presumed super musical, Miss Liberty, by Irving Berlin. That's 3 months after South Pacific opened. This was a musical that had a book by Robert Sherwood, who was an eminent dramatist. He had already won by 1949 3 Pulitzer Prizes. And look at this: music and lyrics by Irving Berlin, Pulitzer Prize librettist Robert Sherwood. The director was the great Moss Hart, and the choreography was by Jerome Robbins. And so everybody thought, this is going to be it. This is going to be the next South Pacific. No two ways about it. And by the way, by that time, this was kind of a patriotic show. Irving Berlin had already written God Bless America, so his credentials as bona fides as a patriotic American were very, very well established, to say the least. Well, it turns out that it didn't work. It was an absolute disappointment at the box office. And interestingly enough, a lot of people considered this to be one of Irving Berlin's best scores, but because of the show's relative failure, it never really caught on. I don't have an analysis as to why it didn't work, but a lot of people that I've read think that one of the problems was that Sherwood was too dramatic. That Sherwood had won 3 Pulitzers. He was a great writer, of course, but that his style wasn't suited to what in those days was more like musical comedy, and so it didn't work. But there's at least one, well, a lot of good songs in this, but there's one that became something of a standard, and you're going to hear that in just a little bit. By the way, interesting point. I love this idea. Irving Berlin always wrote both the music and the lyrics, but there's one song for which he did not write the lyrics, and that song was called Colossus. Give me your tired, your poor. He put to melody the lyrics to the Lazarus poem. So he did not write the lyrics to Give Me Your Tired, Your Poor. Those lyrics were already written. And it's just like somebody didn't have to write the lyrics to There's a Sucker Born Every Minute, right? The Cy Coleman song from Barnum, because somebody had already, Barnum already said that. Or another one, I Never Met a Man I Didn't Like from Will Rogers Follies. That lyric was already written, just had to retrofit the music. And in any event, the genesis of this, by the way, was at the end of World War II. Sherwood actually saw soldiers coming back from the European theater, seeing the Statue of Liberty and observing the overwhelming, passionate, emotional response they had to seeing this iconic statue. And that was what encouraged him to do a show about the Statue of Liberty called Miss Liberty, which had, by the way, a cast of 55. That's a lot of people by any standard, and starred, by the way, an unknown man, or featured an unknown by the name of Eddie Elbert. Despite the fact that this show got poor reviews, 98 singles of the songs, because it was Irving Berlin, right, and pre-sold, were released in the first year after the mid-1949 opening of the show. The other competition at that time, by the way, in addition to South Pacific, was the Cole Porter show, Kiss Me, Kate. One little side note, there's a song in this show, Miss Liberty, called The Policeman's Ball. And the interesting thing about that is that's ragtime. So in 1949, Irving Berlin was revisiting the genre for his first hit, Alexander's Ragtime Band, which in fact was written in 1911. So the idea of, 98 people recording, that's not a big deal because that would have happened. We're going to hear this song from Miss Liberty by Perry Como. I don't think I've ever used Perry Como in this lecture for 25 years, but he is worth using, as you will soon see. He had a 50-year career singing and was only one record label the whole time, RCA. He was one of the most interesting people in the history of music, in the sense of his humanity and his realness and his genuine nature. When he died, he got the most beautiful epitaph in Billboard magazine. They just said at the end, 50 years of music and a life well lived. This man was the real deal. The real deal. Perry Como was the real deal as a human being. He won 5 Emmys. He has 3 stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, 4 miles from where I stand, even as we speak, 1 for radio, 1 for TV, and 1 for music. He was born in Cannonsburg, not far from where I was born, in Pittsburgh, Western Pennsylvania. He became a barber at age 13 to help his family. One day, he did something stupid. He had his earnings. He lost them all in a crap game. He never forgave himself. And in a way, that was a seminal moment for Perry Como, because he said, I made a mistake. I'm not going to make any more mistakes. And pretty much he went through the rest of his life without making any major mistakes. He never forgave himself, but his father did forgive him. And that was another great lesson for him. Anyway, he was singing around town, young kid, good voice, all of that. And a young band leader by the time of Freddie Carlone came by. Now, Freddie Carlone was a regional band. In those days, he had regional bands, right? Western Pennsylvania, Ohio, Midwest regional bands. They weren't all national iconic bands like Benny Goodman. And Freddie heard him, don't know the entire story, and he invited Perry to sing with the band, offered him a job, go on the road with me. Perry Como was making a lot of money in those days being a barber, $125 a week, which is big money in those days. Corleone offered him $28 a week. He hesitated. He wanted to try to help his family. His father said, "You take this shot." He encouraged his son to do that. He gave up, all that money and went to sing with the Corleone band. And he became very, very, very well known. 3 years later, he joined a bigger nationally known band known as Ted Weens. And Weens had the advantage of being on radio. Once you were on radio, everything changed in terms of promotion. On radio, people would buy your records, they would come to see you. Radio was like television is today, the greatest promotional instrument that we have. No two ways. Well, maybe these days the internet, but you take my drift. In 1956, Life magazine had a contest, which person in public life most fits the ideal of the perfect husband? Overwhelming choice was Perry Como. And it reminds me, when I think of Perry Como, of something that Sean Penn said about Clint Eastwood, which I loved hearing very much. He said, Clint Eastwood is the least disappointing icon that I ever met. The least disappointing icon that I ever met. Well, I think Sean Penn never met Perry Como, but I'm sure he would have felt the same way about Perry Como. Another thing which exemplifies what I'm saying about this extraordinary man, in 1929, he met a woman named Rosabelle Bellini. He married her in 1933, and they were married for 65 years until she passed away in 1998. So Perry Como, interestingly enough, was the epitome of having the least difference between his public and his personal persona. And by the way, the other thing about his personal persona, never discussed his personal life. It was off limits. I'm a singer. We talk about my singing, my work, my TV, fine. But I'm not interested in my kids. It's just not going to happen. Wonderful quote by a man named Irvin Drake. This guy's beautifully the way he says it. Irvin Drake, I met him once. He did a song called I Believe in the 50s and wrote what I think is a wonderful musical, starred Stevie Lawrence, called What Makes Sammy Run. Wonderful music in that song. And I had a chance to have dinner with Irvin Drake once at his house. A wonderful person, wrote both music and lyrics. And he said this: occasionally, someone like Perry Como comes along who won't go with the flow and still prevails in spite of all the bankrupt others who surround him and importune him to yield to their values. Only occasionally. That is glorious to me. And it says it all. I mean, if you think of what he says in that quote, it's really profound. That you get Hollywood and all the stuff and the hype and whatever, and then you can still be yourself and be strong. Gotta love this guy. And I like the way he sings too, by the way. There's a Perry Como Avenue in Canonsburg. If you go to Canonsburg, you can see where his barbershop was. And to do that, you will have to go along Perry Como Avenue. And by way of coincidence, Bobby Vinton, the great Bobby Vinton, was also born in Canonsburg. So that's quite a good fodder. He was most comfortable in a cardigan sweater, and it was in that cardigan sweater that he made his first gold disc ever, Catch a Falling Star. But it wasn't only his first gold disc ever, it was the first gold disc ever. The first record to ever get a gold disc, RIAA, was Catch a Falling Star by Perry Como. And by the way, the last thing I want to say about him, no, the next to last thing I want to say, is that I think if he had been a barber, from what I know about him, if he had been a barber, he'd have been just as happy. But he ended up being a singer. But that didn't change anything. It just changed what he did for a living. In 1982, incidentally, the president of Italy, Mr. Bertini, was visiting the White House. Ronald Reagan was president at that time. We had two Italian-American singers that evening singing for the president of Italy. One was Frank Sinatra, and the other one was Perry Como. Well, let's take an old-fashioned walk. I'm just bursting with talk. What a tale could be told if we went for an old-fashioned walk. Now, what Irving Berlin is doing here is he's rhyming he's rhyming old with the word. Old-fashioned walk, which is old is like 4 words in from the back, but he's rhyming that word, old with he writes old with told, controlled, and sold. So what a tale could be told if we went for an old-fashioned walk, and a heart that's controlled may relax on an old-fashioned walk. And then she was wrapped up and sold coming home from an old-fashioned walk. This is a wonderful song. It does not swing, it's something else. And it's a waltz. You'll hear that it's definitely a big waltz. And it's a very sweet song. It bespeaks of the time. Beautifully done, wonderful Irving Berlin melody, a nice, simple, direct, but beautifully crafted lyric, and all run by Perry Como and a chorus. Now, one of the I'm going to do here is compliments with thanks to Harry Aarons again. I'm going to play you 30 seconds, just 30 seconds to give you a taste of the original Ada Jones, Billy Murray, Let's Take an Old-Fashioned Walk, recorded in 1907 at the pen and hand of George M. Cohen. And then we will go into the entire Irving Berlin, 1949, Let's Take an Old-Fashioned Walk with Perry Como and a chorus, of an ensemble chorus. And here we go, 2 versions of Let's Take an Old-Fashioned Walk.
Let's take an old-fashioned walk. Let's have an old-fashioned talk. We will walk any place you choose to. But let's talk about the things we used to. If you want a novelty in outdoor pastime, something for the real blasé, it's an old-fashioned walk and an old-fashioned talk with an old-fashioned girl someday.
Let's take an old-fashioned walk. I'm just bursting with talk. What a tale could be told if we went for an old-fashioned walk. Let's take a stroll through the park, down a lane where it's dark, and a heart that's controlled may relax on an old-fashioned walk. I know for a couple who seem to be miles apart, there's nothing like walking and having a heart-to-heart. I know a girl who declined, couldn't make up her mind. She was wrapped up and sold, coming home from an old-fashioned walk.
Some couples go for a buggy ride when they start caring a lot. Others will bicycle side by side out to some romantic spot.
Some take a ride on a bus, but that would not do for us.
Let's take an old-fashioned walk. I'm just bursting with talk.
What a tale could be told if we went for an old-fashioned walk.
Let's take a stroll through the park, down a lane where it's dark,
and a heart that's controlled may relax on an old-fashioned walk. I know for a couple who seem to be miles apart, there's nothing like walking and having a heart-to-heart.
He knows a girl who declined, couldn't make up her mind.
She was wrapped up and sold, coming home from an old-fashioned walk.
A girl who declined, couldn't make up her mind.
She was wrapped up and sold, coming home from an old-fashioned walk.
wonderful, I say. I've got one more song to do here. I've like two songs, but I only have time for one. I'm gonna have to press along with my customary vigor. A couple of housekeeping things first. My next talk is on May 25th, and I have to tell you something about which I am ambivalent. After a 2.5-year hiatus, we are moving back to the Beverly Hills Public Library. Now, the good news about this is that there's nothing like doing this in front of a live audience and seeing the response and seeing how people are liking what you're doing and whatever. The Zoom, by serendipity, has enabled me to, and then we have a solution to the second problem, has enabled me to get along with people that all over the country, and in some cases all over the world. And this has been really wonderful. I mean, we have 4 or 5 people here from Penn State. There's a couple of people from Florida. And obviously that's expanded the opportunities that I've had to talk to people about music and vice versa. But that's not going to happen on May 25th because we are going to go back to the library and we're going to have the people around Los Angeles at the time be able to come like the old days. What we're going to do next year, though, and this was Alice's idea, and it's a good one, is we're going to have a hybrid reality. When we figure out what the fall schedule, this will be my last lecture until the fall, May 25th. And when we figure out what the fall schedule is, then we will do part on Zoom and part in the library. So that unless you're in Los Angeles on the 25th, I won't see you then, but keep an eye peeled for our messages. So we will see you in the fall somewhere on Zoom. Now, for those of you who are in Los Angeles, we're going to try to make this a celebration on May 25th. I do hope that you'll come. We're going to have a free gift for everybody, a musical gift, may I say. We're going to have our special patented raffle that some of you may remember. And the gift for that, the prize for winning that is going to be quite a good one. We're trying to line up some guest people to come because it's been a long time. We've had a period of time we didn't do anything, and then we did the Zoom. And so for us to be back in a room with people sharing this music is going to be wonderful. And while I will miss being able to say hello to people across these United States, we've got to go back to reality. So please come on May 25th. If you're in Los Angeles, we're going to have a big special time as a kind of a coming out party. And for those of you who are not going to be here, keep your ear to the grind to the TV or your computer, and we will hope to see you in the fall. I also want to acknowledge Cutie Pie here. Cutie Pie, this is you may know Cutie Pie. Some people think it's AJ. I picked the pictures, then she got all the pictures up. She did all the Zoom. She's got a little TV studio in our living room here, and she wants to say hello to you. There's the smile. That's it. This is a technical genius of great consequence. AJ, actually, her name is not Cutie Pie. It's actually Little Doll. But so May 25th, big doings in the Beverly Hills Public Library. Next fall, Zooming with Sue Paterno, who I see up there, Graham and others, George, I hope. And Robert from Philadelphia, Robert from Dayton, etc.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning me.
Susan Amerikaner says you're a little doll indeed. Yeah, you got that right. I second it. I got to move along here. She is. You don't have no idea, Susan. You're correct. Correctamente, Susan. Correctamente. I gotta get one song in here fast because I want to leave you with Frank Sinatra Jr. And I'm going to have to do this. I'm going to kind of shortcut this a little bit. Frank Sinatra Jr. did not rebel, even though he had a very difficult father who was never around. And, Frank Sinatra, he was a complicated guy. And yet somehow Frank Sinatra Jr. decided he didn't want to go to be a goth. He wanted to do the Great American Songbook like his father. Thank God for that for us. Frank Sinatra had all the taste of his father. He had the voice of his father. He could swing like his father. He did not have the charisma or the emotional power as a father. Now, because that is probably the single most important quality that Frank Sinatra had, or certainly one of them, well, then it's a bit of a problem, but he's great. he's great. You know, if you're not Frank Sinatra, it's no big deal because nobody is, in my view. But if you're damn good, what Frank Sinatra Jr. is, that's okay too. Very quickly, he was born in 1944 in Jersey City, which is a little town, the largest town in New Jersey, now second largest, next to Hoboken, where his father was born. And he always wanted to follow in his dad's footsteps, always did. So when he was 19 years old, he actually joined the Sam Donahue Band, 19 years old. Well, he had a few connections, by the way. And Sam Donahue was a good band. He was kind of a second tier band in a lot of ways, but a good band. He recorded, he had albums, he did touring, and Donahue actually fronted the Dorsey Band when Dorsey died. But Sam Donahue, kind of a second year, but when Frank Sinatra Jr. joined the band, well, you can imagine how that catapulted Sam Donahue into the highlight. And Sam Donahue later became the musical director of the Playboy Clubs. And you may not know, or you may know, that the Playboy Clubs really had an amazing music policy. I mean, an amazing. Cy Coleman was actually appeared with Playboy all the time, Playboy After Dark, all that stuff. I mean, they were, Hugh Hefner loved the Great American Songbook. He loved jazz, and he had very good music at the Playboy Clubs, very good music. And Sam Donahue ran that for a long time. Frank Sinatra Jr. loved to work. By 1968, he was born in 1944, so he wasn't that old, 24. He had been to 47 states singing and to 30 countries. He just loved to work. He later became his father's conductor because Frank, at the end, he was losing his memory. He couldn't read the lyrics. He couldn't remember the lyrics, and he was feeling uneasy on stage. He hadn't lost the emotional power of his voice, but I got distracted by message. Sorry. But he wasn't confident in a lot of those things, even though he still had the emotional power. So he only wanted his son to conduct because he completely trusted his son, and his son did. His son gave up all the things of his own career to conduct for his father. Frank Sinatra Jr. said, when you're Frank Sinatra's son, it's a double-edged sword. It opens doors, well, needless to say, but you have to work harder to prove yourself. One little side note, big deal that you may remember, he was kidnapped, was Frank Sinatra Jr. in 1963 from room 417 at Harrah's Lake Tahoe. He was released in only 2 days when Sinatra paid $240,000 to get him released. That would be $2 million in today's money. 3 men were caught and did serve time for the crime. Now, everything, no cell phones in those days, right? And everything was done by payphone. And Frank Sinatra had to be on the payphone, right? Call, whatever. He was always afraid that he would not have enough dimes. So he always carried a roll of dimes in his pocket during that kidnapping ordeal over those 2 days. And from that point on, he never went anywhere, did Frank Sinatra, without a roll of dimes in his pocket, so much so that he is buried in Cathedral City with, among other things, a bottle of Jack Daniels and a roll of dimes. Incidentally, the movie Robin and the Seven Hoods was being filmed by Frank Sinatra during that period when he went through the ordeal of Frank getting kidnapped. You're going to hear a song called The Masquerade is Over, written by Ali Rubel from Middletown, Connecticut, who also wrote Gone with the Wind. I know he wrote a song called Gone with the Wind, which has nothing to do with the movie Gone with the Wind. Gone with the Wind, great jazz standards. And I'll Buy That Dream, many other things about him, but I just don't have time. But he wrote this song. And oh, by the way, I shouldn't forget to tell you that he actually worked for my old company, Disney, back in 1947, way before I got there, and wrote a song called Zippity Doo Dah. That was this guy. The guy who wrote the song you're about to hear was hired by the man Walt to sing Zippity Doo Dah. Herb Magidson wrote the lyrics. He did 23 films, 4 Broadway revues, and he won. Here's an interesting fact. The guy who wrote the lyrics of the song you're about to hear won the very first Oscar for Best Song, which was getting for the first time in 1934, called The Continental. He also wrote a song called I'll Buy That Dream. And he did a number of films, No No Nanette, Gay Divorce, Great Ziegfeld. The Masquerade is Over is a wonderful song another way of expressing we loved each other, but I know it's gone. A couple of interesting things I like about this song. You look the same, you're a lot the same, but my heart says, no, you're not the same. Love that lyric. You look the same, you're a lot the same, but my heart says, no, you're not the same. I'm afraid the masquerade is over. And then one thing that Sinatra Jr. does, I love when they change lyrics and make them a little better. There's a lyric in here that says, your words don't mean what they used to mean. They were once inspired, now they're just routine. Now they're just routine. Sinatra changes that to have two adjectives. Now they're flat, comma, routine. Now, instead of saying they're just routine, they're flat, routine. So he builds up the idea by doubling the descriptive phrases, descriptive words, and I like that very much. This song, "The Masquerade is Over," is not particularly well known, but it was recorded by Billie Holiday of all people and Marvin Gaye, and yet it isn't really all that known. The album from which this comes, Frank Sinatra Jr. tried to get me involved in this album. We had lunch one day and he said, I want $100,000. I want to bring Billy May, the great Billy May, out of retirement. And I want to have him do all new arrangements of songs my dad never recorded. And this is one of them. Well, $100,000 is a lot of money for a record album in those days, right? Because the record business wasn't as big as it used to be. You couldn't promote it. There was no Ed Sullivan to promote it. And then, and I thought, well, gee, this is really a lot of money, you know, but it's Frank Sinatra Jr. and I'm starstruck because I love his dad so much. And then he told me that he would only promote the album ever if he would only have a big band. So he wouldn't go on the Carson show unless he could bring his own big band with him to promote it. Well, that's going to cost you $25,000. So I thought, well, this is not ever going to work. So I walked away from it happily. Somehow, some way, 10 years after that, he got the money to do it somehow, some way. Billy May, who was retired in San Diego, did come out of retirement, gave all these new wonderful Billy May charts, wonderful, and the rest is history. Now, last thing I want to say about this, every once in a while in an arrangement, the orchestrator actually creates a new melody. And you're going to hear that melody once or twice at the beginning, and then in the instrumental bridge, and then at the end. So it's a little several measure riff. But Billy May has actually created a new melody here. This is a wonderful way to leave you because it's a gas of a song by a wonderful, wonderful singer who's got the genes from his dad. I look forward to seeing you in person on May 25th, if you can make it. I look forward to seeing all the rest of you on Zoom sometime in the fall. Thank you for joining me. And I leave you with the great Frank Sinatra Jr. We lost him too early. Billy May, as good as they get, and a gas of a song called "The Masquerade is Over." Listen to the new little melody that Billy May created, and listen to why I say he's one of the greatest arrangers that ever lived. Bye. Here we go. Thanks, everybody. Melody.
Your eyes don't shine like they used to shine, and the thrill is gone when your lips meet mine. I'm afraid the masquerade is over, and so is love, and so is love. Well, your words don't mean what they used to mean. They were once inspired, now they're flat routine. I'm afraid the masquerade is over, and so is love, and so is love. Yes, I gotta play Pagliacci, find myself a clown's disguise, and learn how to smile like Pagliacci with the tears in my eyes. You look the same, you're a lot the same, but this heart says no, No, you're not the same. I'm afraid the masquerade is over, and so is love, and so is love.
Billy May. One more time, Billy May. Frank Jr.
Guess I gotta play Pagliacci, find myself a clown's disguise, and then learn how to smile like Pagliacci, with the tears in my eyes, where you look the same, a lot the same, but this heart says no, no, you're not the same. I'm afraid the masquerade is over, and so is love, and so is love.